So sometime when Pokemon was first released, there was the idea that Mew wasn't really the story of Mew really kind of didn't make sense at first, being that it was a very secret Pokemon. So there's all sorts of interpretations that could be brought up. Well, somehow there was the notion that Mew's story was actually supposed to be different between that of Mewtwo. If you actually dig around on the internet, and while they have probably changed the story around a lot, but there's tons of debate still what it could have been. But there were some people that believed at one point that Mewtwo was actually not really conceived by Mew, but by a clone of some other kind. Now that's not to say that Mew had nothing to do with Mewtwo, because it's still named after Mew. But it's kind of weird though to think, like, as Pokemon was being developed, Mew really does fit that scenario because there's so much we don't know about it and what it really is. So if that is true, then how would the stories have been different? But even more confusing, there's even been the debate that, Mew wasn't supposed to be in Gen 1. And if that was the case, then, how does Mewtwo's story make sense? Honestly, here's what I think. I think at one point the game designers were going to have to add Mew because there would just be kind of contradictions. Whether it would be Mew's story that wouldn't make sense, or it would be Mewtwo's story that wouldn't make sense, or both rather in this case, somehow. So we know that Mew is a Pokemon that's the ancestor of all Pokemon. It's got all the genetics in it, and some people believe that maybe Mew actually existed before Arceus did, and I don't think that's. I mean, I don't think it's 100% true, but I do think that Mew could have been it could have been one of the first Pokemon that was created by Arceus, because you had its parents that obviously existed before Arceus and Mew, and then we know that there's more than one universe, but we have yet to figure out what that is beyond that. Arceus just kind of watches everything from a distance. That's basically so basically we know it's always holding back. It's never really unleashed its true powers. Like, even explained in mythology, it says that it has like 1,000 arms. Well, we know it's more than capable of what it's demonstrating. So that's just to kind of give you an idea that Pokemon could very well not contradicting itself, but there's more out there than one meets the eye with the series. So it really does make you wonder what else could they have had in store for us. So when I think of Pokemon, this is what I think. Okay, so sometime during Pokemon's 6 year of development, Mew was actually originally designed, but only the only original game designers at Game Freak. That's Satoshi Tajiri, Ken Sugimori, and then there's a couple other people involved too, and they knew about Mew. Well, what we understand is that Mew was added at the last second. Mew was added in a way that it stated that it possibly could have cost him his job too. I'm trying to remember what his name was. He stated that when Mew was originally created, they added in after they removed all the debug mode tools and all that, so that way Mew was there. But it only made sense to put Mew in the game because they still had that extra data that was in the game, and there wouldn't have been any reason not to if we were to say that, if they tested it all and it was all ready to go. Because at some point, if they were planning this at some point, the game designers themselves, because keep in mind, cartridges, the data had to be present on the cartridge in order for Mew to exist. So if the game designers were doing this in a way that only they had access to it somehow, but like they released another version that wasn't complete, then it would have to be like they'd have to add Mew at some point. And not only that, but what's really strange is, how did Mewtwo get created to begin with? It was based on an artifact from Mew. It was a fossilized version of Mew that they found. Now, that's not to say that there's more than one Mew, or maybe there is only one Mew, because I do think there's more than one Mew, but we've only found Mew. We only found one Mew. And so if that is true, then, it really does make you wonder, like, how many Mews really existed, and did they just exist on Earth, or did they come from other planets and all that? So if that's the case, then, there's definitely something to think about there. Then there's something else to really think about that's even crazier is, what would Mewtwo have been made of then if Mew didn't exist? Or what would have happened to Mew? Would Mew have just been dead and nobody ever would have found Mew, even though we found Mew? It's kind of something to think about, really. But I do think at some point they would have to have added Mew because there was no other explanation that there could have been. Mewtwo, and then all of a sudden you have Mew. So they discovered Mew because if you read the journals, Mr. Fuji actually knew about Mew. And again, there's a lot of prototype data that suggests otherwise, that, there's some stuff that's missing too from some of this. But we believe that it still would have ended. It kind of would have expanded the story a little bit more, why, how Mew was created and, what had happened. But instead, what happened was we just got the idea that Red just saw all the aftermath. And if you actually saw the journals, knew that there was something that survived there, you would have known that, yeah, there was definitely something going on there. On one hand, it was like you go to Cinnabar Island, the whole island's been desecrated. You talk to the citizens there, they basically talk about how there was experiments that went there, but they never really showed what happened though. Well, it was because that's where Mewtwo was originally from, or it was moved to Cinnabar Island, destroyed it, and then it went somewhere else. Now, I found some stuff in Gen 1's prototype that, would suggest that there were like hidden rooms and all that. Like there was like if you go play the beta version, there's one room in Fuchsia City, the hidden ninja town, basically, where Koga resided, the Fit Gym. And so you would find out that there was actually another hideout there, but you couldn't go there right away. So what happened though was, and I'm trying to think like really what really triggers the event that unlocks that door. Maybe it's the secret key that you need, or maybe it was. But it's like the door's locked when you first get to Fuchsia City. But if you come back later on, the door is unlocked. You go there and there's it's like a hidden hideout that's abandoned. And it's like, well, wait a minute, was Mewtwo in there that whole time and then they moved it? Or did they, because that's what happened though. Because you go in there and there's a machine, it's kind of like an environmental room and it's all been destroyed and all that. And you're like, well, wait a minute, So if you're digging around, then there's a little photo that survived and it's got a picture of Mewtwo that just happened to have been there. And then all of a sudden, it's gets destroyed, but it's also, nothing, what was there before is gone now. But it remains that there's definitely was something there at one point that really proved otherwise, that could have shown off what it was capable of doing. So that's actually very interesting. And so Pokemon has taught me that, it definitely, everything's been based on something else, but there's a lot more than what meets the eye. And so, what really we end up finding out was Mewtwo was then transported. Giovanni always wanted Mewtwo because he had like everything else. And obviously, he couldn't get Mewtwo himself because Red kept interfering. But this is when Red was not really sure, like who was Giovanni really? He just never could. Team Rocket was always helping out Giovanni, trying to help him like, trying to blockade everything and take over certain things, but they couldn't figure out exactly like what was Mewtwo supposed to be. A lot of people didn't really know what Giovanni was after, but they, he speculated that, he used to be a corrupt businessman in the sense that he got so caught up in working with Dr. Fuji that he thought he owed him. Like the whole Mewtwo project and cloning experiments and all that were actually done by a lot of people, and there was a lot of people tied to it that at the same time though weren't really tied to it anymore, because after the project had already been abandoned and Mewtwo was gone, there was only so much they could do. And so really after Mewtwo was eventually caught again and then they just moved it somewhere else, a lot of people were in on the whole thing, but they didn't really tell you until they revealed it. And so Giovanni was always trying to find another way to get it because he felt like he was owed it somehow. It's possible that, Team Rocket was the one that really, there's a couple people that originally discovered Mew, but it was like people that worked for Team Rocket. And so what happened was, as time went on, they eventually found out that, maybe they were getting screwed out of the deal, and maybe Giovanni was really not the bad guy at the same time. Maybe he was just trying to get his revenge on the people that, threw him under the bus with the, because he had like some shareholders meeting, or like they had like some kind of equity in this whole thing and the whole project, because if you're rich, you know stuff that most people in the public don't know. And the Silph Co is obviously one of the most profitable companies in the whole Pokemon series. So what they don't show you is that the president of the Silph Co and the Silph Chief and all that, some of this beta stuff that was cut from the game, before we see Giovanni attacking Saffron City and the Silph Co. We say he's just basically discussing matters because he wants to know how they designed the Master Ball prototype. And, this was before Mewtwo. This is before Giovanni probably built his own Mewtwo, if we were to say that was based on the anime, and maybe that's a different story. But, why did Giovanni have to build that Mewtwo, though? Why did he have to build the armored Mewtwo? Because that was the closest he ever got to having a legit Mewtwo. I mean, unless of course you count like the Rainbow Rockets from the Ultra Sun and Moon storyline, but I don't know how where you fit that in. But the only thing I can think of is the only reason why Giovanni did that was because he knew enough about Mewtwo. He knew exactly where it was at. But, you know, so that's proof that he was involved with the project at one point. But the thing was, though, he did not know how to get the regular Mewtwo because, you know, Mewtwo was always just ahead of him on everything. You know, at one point he worked for him, but then he just decided that he didn't want to just be a killer machine anymore. So he didn't want to just do what he did. You know, he wanted to live its own life, and it thought like the best way to do it was to take him and its clones and go somewhere else. So away from humanity, away from planet Earth, possibly, and then maybe go establish somewhere on another planet or something like that. Kind of like Mew. Where was Mew hiding out? On a faraway island somewhere on Earth. You know, somewhere where that only nobody could find it. But because they're psychic types, you know, they have like supernatural powers. They don't die. They can fly in space and not die. They're basically gods of some kind. Aliens that are so advanced that even nature's cruelest elements can't really necessitate it or... But it's interesting, though. So, you know, the story of Mew, the story of Mewtwo would have to make sense at some point. Whether because they'd have to be revealed or because it would contradict, you know, one came from the other, and hence the names on it too. Because even in the Japanese version, it's called Mewtwo, so you'd have to have, you know, where's Mew 1 at then, you know. It's a very interesting thing, because even if you want to say Mew itself was like maybe a prototype of Mewtwo, and obviously it wasn't in this case, it's like, well, if you're biologically going based on its parenthood, then the father would still have to be out there still then, so... that being Mew in this case. So, or mother, because Mew is definitely an it. You could say Mewtwo could be an it too. But it's possible though, you know, we don't know the genetics. But it's possible that, you know, because they are pure psychic types and nothing else, you know, they just, I mean, you start tampering with their genetics and all of a sudden, you know, now they're capable of doing different things and their origins are different too. So Mewtwo was created by humans. And Mew was obviously created by like another advanced terrestrial being, you know, in this case, Arceus, at some point. So just like a lot of other things, Mew was without a doubt probably one of the, and it would have to make sense that something they had to have included Mew at some point because they were some of the game designers' actual favorite Pokemon. So maybe the fact that they put it in there, maybe that's just the story they stuck with. You know, I mean, because when you're a big corporation, a lot of people often want to know, for like, you know, the front of it at least, you know, why they did what they did, you know, for marketing purposes and whatnot. And I mean, so I do believe Satoshi Tajiri's not lying when he says that, you know, Mew was his favorite Pokemon as well as probably some others. But basically, the fact that they added it at the last second, it had to have made sense. I think they were going to add it at some point, but they probably were thinking, well, if we add it in there at the last second, but we don't tell anybody, they still kind of had their little secret for a while, what Pokemon they wanted to keep for themselves, but they were kind of shocked that somebody would eventually have data mined the game and found it, but they probably knew at some point somebody was going to do it. Because when Pokemon first came out, a lot of people were making up rumors about like how to get Mew and all that, but because a lot of people were starting to find out that Mew actually existed in the coding, somebody data mined the game and got it before they were supposed to know it existed. And this is kind of like a running trend with every Pokemon game. You know, as it's getting released, the Pokemon are pre-programmed into it, but we're not supposed to know they exist until they're revealed. Well, that doesn't stop people from hacking their games and then releasing it ahead of time. You know, like, you know, finding out like the mythical legendaries and the event Pokemon before they're actually released. And so what Pokemon have we not seen yet that exists right now? And there you go. So now you got an idea that has blown a lot of people's minds. And it really does go to show you that, you know, their origin stories really are still known by a lot of people, but it only seems to make sense that, you know, there's always more to the story, especially if you're a game designer, and it's always one of the game designers' only stories. I remember looking on the internet one time, there was actually pictures of Satoshi Tajiri going to like some of the people's houses, the developers, they were obviously hanging really close to each other, hanging out, programming stuff. And this would, and you can actually see some of these pictures that they took back in the day where they were actually like again in Japan, hanging out, and you know, this is when they were discussing like the Pokemon, like Mew and all that. You know, they were talking about how how it got created, how, you know, and then they do like battles and stuff, and you know, just, you know, friends hanging out, but like sitting there joking about how they got this piece of data that nobody else knows about, and yet this was also at the time when Pokemon, before it was even created, you know, while they were still creating it, of course. But it's interesting to think that that's how they discuss stuff like that. They were discussing like a lot of stuff that most people don't even know about as far as the series goes. But you know, but again, you know, I do think that once again, if Mew wasn't created, then they'd have to do something different with Mewtwo, whether it was conceived by like a genetics, or maybe Mew was dead, or maybe Mew just hadn't been found, you know. But there's still the possibility that, you know, Mew had to have existed. See, it kind of goes back to another theory. You know, how is it that, like, for example, like Professor Oak, for example. Okay, Professor Oak was the final boss in the prototype version, and Mewtwo was, Professor Oak knew about Mewtwo. Okay, and that's how, because if Professor Oak invented the Pokedex, then how do they have like some kind of programming for Mew in the Pokedex, the encyclopedia? How did they already know about Mew? More importantly, what it even is. You know, that's got to be a dead giveaway that they knew ahead of time about these Pokemon. And it's possible that Professor Oak didn't catch Mew, but it actually was just holding on to him for a while. So a lot of people would have been very surprised what they could have came across if a lot of people didn't know what it was capable of doing. So I think what's really interesting is a lot of people would, again, there's a lot of secrets that we have yet to find out in Pokemon that are there, but we have to really ask ourselves what that is and what it means. Really, in the end, it's, you know, the game designers have their own secrets, but at the same time, you know, they have released Mew and a lot of other Pokemon, so it only made sense that while there was cartridge limitations, Mew eventually did find its way in there. And maybe as a marketing gimmick too, so that way the sales would skyrocket, as another reason that Pokemon succeeded before it even hit international releases. So that's actually something to think about as far as the games go, and what that means for the series as a whole. And that's just one of the many mysteries that we still have yet to figure out, is what else do we not know about the series that is still carrying itself on. So again, something to think about, and we'll just have to keep going. So, you know, again, subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to support me, you can send me Amazon gift cards. If you want, just message me. We can work something out. But anything that you decide to contribute, you know, we'll just go back to this channel somehow. So we'll keep on going. But as of right now, I'm just going to keep motivating myself to keep finding some data and some stuff to talk about. So we'll keep on doing that, as well as the series. If you haven't noticed, we're just beating as many games as we can from start to finish. So hopefully we can just keep finding something to do, and hopefully that will traverse into something great, because it already is.